Under the burning African sun, a sharp sound cuts through the noise of the street. A man stumbles back, his face turned to the side, the sting of a slap still fresh on his skin. People freeze, phones rise, laughter mixes with shock. He does not shout, he does not fight back, he simply lowers his eyes and breathes. Across the city, in a glass-filled boardroom, a pen hovers above paper, one signature away from a $2 billion deal. No one on that street knows who the man really is. No one knows what that single slap has just awakened. But in a few hours, the truth will walk into the room, and everything will change. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. The city woke up before the sun fully rose. Vendors pushed their wooden carts onto dusty sidewalks. Buses groaned as they swallowed crowds of workers heading into another long day. The air carried the smell of roasted corn fuel and morning sweat, familiar, heavy, alive. In this city, everyone was rushing somewhere, chasing something, or running away from something else. Amadou Ba walked through it all quietly. He wore a simple faded shirt, clean but old, and trousers that had seen too many washes. His shoes were worn at the soles, yet carefully polished as if he respected them, despite their age. To anyone watching, he looked like just another man trying to survive the day, another invisible body in a city full of millions. But inside Amadou's chest, his heartbeat was steady, focused. Today mattered. He paused at a street corner checking his watch. Not expensive, not flashy, just functional. He was early as he always was. Being early had saved him more than once in his life. Being early meant control. Across the street, traffic slowed as a sleek black SUV slid to a stop. Its windows were tinted, its body spotless, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. Drivers nearby glanced at it with a mix of curiosity and envy. Power always announced itself, even without words. The back door opened. Siphesihle Zondi stepped out like the world owed her space. Her heels struck the pavement sharply, confidently. She wore a tailored dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her hair styled without a single strand out of place. Dark sunglasses hid her eyes, but her posture spoke loudly enough, upright, impatient, superior. People noticed her instantly. Some stepped aside without realizing why. Others stared a second too long. Siphesihle was used to it. She had grown up with attention following her like a shadow. She barely registered the faces around her. To her, they blended into one faceless crowd. "Why are we stopping here?" she snapped, turning slightly toward the driver. "Traffic ahead, miss," the driver replied carefully. She clicked her tongue in annoyance. "Unbelievable. I told you I don't have time for this." She checked her phone. No new messages, no missed calls. That irritated her even more. She hated waiting. She hated delay. She hated anything that reminded her the world didn't move at her pace. Siphesihle adjusted her bag and stepped forward, deciding to walk the remaining distance to a nearby cafe where she had planned to meet a friend. It was just a few minutes away. Besides, walking allowed people to see her. As she crossed the street, Amadou stepped off the curb at the same time. They collided. Not hard, just enough for her shoulder to jolt and her balance to shift. "What is wrong with you?" Siphesihle snapped instantly. Amadou caught himself and stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said calmly. "I wasn't looking." Siphesihle looked him up and down. The clothes, the shoes, the way he stood composed but plain. In her mind, a judgment formed in less than a second. "Of course you weren't," she said coldly. "People like you never look where you're going." Amadou frowned slightly. "Excuse me, you heard me?" she replied, her voice rising just enough for others to notice. "Do you know how much this dress costs? Do you know where you're standing?" Amadou glanced around. People had begun to slow down. A few curious faces turned toward them. A small circle of attention formed, invisible but powerful. "I apologized," he said. "There's no need for—" "For what?" Siphesihle interrupted sharply. "For you to bump into someone like me and think you can just walk away?" Her sunglasses came off. Her eyes were sharp, unforgiving. Amadou felt the weight of the moment settle. He could feel it, the tension, the fragile line between dignity and humiliation. He had seen it before, many times, in different cities, different countries, different faces. "Let's not make this a scene," he said quietly. That sentence did it. Siphesihle laughed short, mocking. "A scene," she repeated. "You think you get to decide that?" She stepped closer, invading his space. "People like you should learn where you belong." Around them, phones began to rise. Someone whispered, someone else smirked. A few watched with discomfort, unsure whether to intervene. Amadou stood still. Inside his mind, thoughts moved quickly, meetings, contracts, faces waiting for him in a boardroom across the city. He thought of Aissatou Diallo, already preparing documents, of Kwame Mensah, waiting calmly, knowing exactly who Amadou was and what today meant. He also thought of something else. Respect. "Madam," he said, his voice steady, "I don't want trouble." Sipheshile's jaw tightened. "Trouble," she echoed. "You think this is trouble?" And then before anyone could stop it, her hand moved. The sound cracked through the air. A slap. Sharp. Loud. Final. Amadou's head turned slightly with the force. His cheek burned. For a moment the world went silent. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade. People gasped. Someone dropped a phone. Someone else whispered, "Did she really just—" Siphesihle stood tall, breathing hard. For a split second, something flickered behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or satisfaction. There she said coldly, "Now you'll remember next time." Amadou did not raise his hand. He did not shout. He slowly turned his face back toward her. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not afraid. Just controlled. A deep breath in, a slow breath out. "I hope," he said softly, "that one day you learn the cost of moments like this." She scoffed. "Don't threaten me." "It wasn't a threat," Amadou replied. "It was a fact." That unsettled her more than she expected. She waved her hand dismissively. "Get out of my sight." Amadou looked around once more at the crowd, at the phones, at the curious eyes. He adjusted his shirt calmly, then stepped away. As he walked off, whispers followed him. "Did you see that?" She slapped him like he was nothing. Men like that should know better. Siphesihle slipped her sunglasses back on, her heart still pounding. She told herself she had done nothing wrong. People like him needed to be reminded of their place. That's how the world worked. Still, as she turned toward the cafe, a strange discomfort settled in her chest. She shook it off. Across the city, a boardroom waited, and Amadou Ba kept walking toward a destiny no one on that street could imagine. The crowd did not disappear when Amadou Ba walked away. If anything, it grew. People lingered, replaying the moment in their heads, the slap, the silence, the calm way the man had taken it. Some laughed it off already, turning it into gossip. Others felt a tightness in their chests they could not explain. A woman selling fruit shook her head slowly. "That wasn't right," she murmured to no one in particular. Nearby, a young man scoffed. He should have known his place. The city absorbed the moment and kept breathing. Amadou walked 2 blocks before he stopped. He stood beneath the shade of a jacaranda tree, its purple petals scattered across the ground like fallen memories. He touched his cheek lightly. It still burned, not from pain, but from something deeper, something older. Humiliation had a way of waking the past. For a brief second, his mind drifted backward to dusty classrooms with broken windows, to teachers who overlooked him, to rooms where decisions were made without him present. He remembered being underestimated, ignored, laughed at. He had learned early that anger wasted energy. Power, he had learned, came from restraint. His phone vibrated. Amadou glanced at the screen. "Aissatou Diallo." He answered calmly. "Yes, we're ready," her voice said. "Mr. Mensah just arrived. The legal team is reviewing the final draft. I'll be there," Amadou replied. There was a pause on the line. Aissatou hesitated, then spoke softly. "Are you all right?" Amadou looked at the street again, at the life rushing past. "I'm fine," he said. "I'll see you soon." He ended the call and straightened his shoulders. Today was not about ego. Today was about consequences. Across town, Siphesihle Zondi sat at a polished marble table, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. The cafe was expensive, minimalist, designed for people who wanted to be seen without interacting. Her friend Lindoui talked excitedly about a fashion launch, but Siphesihle barely listened. Her mind kept replaying the man's face, not his clothes, not his silence, his eyes. They hadn't pleaded. They hadn't burned with rage. They had looked certain. That annoyed her. "Did you hear what I said?" Lindoui asked. Siphesihle blinked. What Lindoui raised an eyebrow. "Wow, you're distracted. Who was that guy you slapped earlier?" Siphesihle stiffened. "How do you? Everyone's talking about it," Lindoui said casually. "Someone posted a video. It's already spreading." Siphesihle's grip tightened around her cup. And people are divided." Lindoui shrugged. "Some say you went too far," Siphesihle scoffed. "Please, he bumped into me. He deserved it." Lindoui studied her for a moment. "You don't usually react like that." Siphesihle stood abruptly. "I don't have time for this. I need to get to my father's office." She paid quickly and walked out, heels striking the pavement with force. Each step felt heavier than the last, though she refused to admit why. Chairman Themba Zondi's office sat atop a glass tower overlooking the city. From this height, the chaos below looked orderly, controlled, predictable. Siphesihle entered without knocking. Her father looked up from his desk, surprised. "Siphesihle, I thought you were meeting friends." She waved it off. "I changed my mind." He studied her face. "Something happened." "No," she said too quickly. "Nothing important." Themba leaned back slightly. Years of leadership had taught him when silence was louder than words. "You seem tense," he said calmly. Siphesihle crossed her arms. "Is the deal still happening today?" "Yes," he replied. "Everything is prepared. This partnership will define the next decade of this company." She nodded, relieved. "Good. There's something else," Themba added. The lead representative from the other side requested a private moment before the signing. Siphesihle frowned. "Why, some people prefer to look you in the eye before committing $2 billion, he said mildly. She forced a smile. "Of course." Still, unease crept into her chest. Meanwhile, Amadou arrived at the building through a side entrance. Security nodded respectfully as he passed. Elevators opened without delay. On the top floor, the atmosphere changed. The air was cooler, quieter, focused. Aissatou greeted him immediately, handing him a tablet. "Everything is ready. The board is waiting." Kwame Mensah stepped forward, smiling warmly. "Amadou," he said, "you look thoughtful." Amadou returned the smile. "The morning has been educational." Kwame chuckled. "The world always teaches. Whether we listen is the question." They entered the boardroom together. Men and women in tailored suits rose to their feet instinctively. Conversation stopped. Respect settled into the room like gravity. Amadou took his seat at the head of the table. No one questioned it. They reviewed documents, clarified terms, adjusted phrasing. Millions turned into billions with the stroke of a pen. Infrastructure projects, energy pipelines, thousands of jobs. And yet in Amadou's mind, one image kept resurfacing. A raised hand, a slap, a city street. He closed the folder slowly. "I'd like to proceed to the signing," he said. Back in the Zondi tower, Siphesihle stood beside her father as advisors moved around them. She tried to project confidence, but her thoughts refused to settle. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification. She glanced at it. The video. Her heart skipped. She clicked it before she could stop herself. There she was, captured from an angle she hadn't seen. The anger on her face, the force of her arm, the stunned silence afterward. The comments scrolled endlessly. Disgusting behavior. She didn't even hesitate. He didn't fight back. "Why?" Siphesihle swallowed hard and locked her phone. "What's wrong?" her father asked, noticing her pale expression. "Nothing," she whispered. But deep down, something had shifted. She didn't know it yet, but the slap she had delivered so easily had already left her hand. It was traveling, and it was about to land somewhere she never expected. By the time Amadou Ba stepped out of the elevator, the city had already moved on from the slap. That was how the world worked. Moments that shattered one person's dignity became entertainment for another, then noise, then nothing. The street where it happened had returned to its rhythm, bargaining voices, honking horns, hurried footsteps. Only the memory lingered, floating from phone to phone, from mouth to mouth. Amadou walked through the lobby without hurry. People didn't recognize him. They never did. Not like this. To them, he was still the man in the worn shoes, the one who had been struck and walked away. And that was exactly how he wanted it for now. Outside, the midday heat pressed down harder. He adjusted his collar and stood still for a moment, letting the noise wash over him. Somewhere inside that noise was judgment. Somewhere else was indifference. He had learned long ago that neither deserved too much attention. His phone vibrated again. This time it was Kwame Mensah. "Are you close?" Kwame asked. 5 minutes, Amadou replied. "There's something you should know." Kwame hesitated. "The video is everywhere." Amadou smiled faintly. "I assumed it would be." Kwame lowered his voice. "Do you want us to address it?" "We can make a statement. Protect your image." "My image," Amadou repeated softly. "Let it breathe. Truth doesn't suffocate." Kwame paused, then sighed. "Very well, we'll wait." Amadou ended the call and continued walking. Across town, Siphesihle Zondi stood in front of a full-length mirror, staring at her reflection as if it belonged to someone else. She had changed outfits twice already. Nothing felt right. Her reflection stared back, flawless makeup, sharp eyes, perfect posture. The same Siphesihle she had always been. And yet something underneath had cracked, not enough to shatter her confidence, just enough to irritate her. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, another notification. She ignored it. Nomusa Zondi knocked softly on the door and stepped in. "Siphesihle," she said gently. "Your father is asking for you." Siphesihle forced a smile. "I'm coming." Nomusa studied her daughter's face. Mothers always noticed what others missed. "Are you sure you're all right?" Siphesihle snapped. "I said I'm fine." Nomusa nodded quietly and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "The world watches more closely than you think," she said softly. Siphesihle frowned. "What does that mean?" Nomusa didn't answer. She simply closed the door. Siphesihle stood alone again. And for the first time that day, doubt whispered louder than pride. The boardroom across the city was silent, not the awkward kind, the focused kind. Amadou sat at the head of the table, fingers lightly resting on the leather folder before him. Around him, executives waited, some calm, some eager, some nervous. $2 billion had a way of doing that. Aissatou Diallo stood slightly behind him, tablet in hand, eyes sharp. She had seen many sides of Amadou over the years, his patience, his restraint, his refusal to dominate rooms unnecessarily. But today there was something else. Resolve. "Before we proceed," Amadou said, breaking the silence, "there's a matter of principle I'd like to address." Eyes lifted, spine straightened. Kwame glanced at him briefly but said nothing. "This partnership," Amadou continued, "is not just about capital. It's about alignment, about values, about how power is exercised and how people are treated when no one thinks it matters." Some nodded, others exchanged uncertain looks. Amadou leaned back slightly. "I don't need assurances," he said. "I need awareness." He closed the folder gently. "We'll proceed in 1 hour," he concluded. "I need time." No one argued. When Amadou rose, the room followed instinctively. Aissatou stepped closer as they exited. "You're thinking about the girl," she said quietly. "I'm thinking about the world that raised her," Amadou replied. Back at the Zondi Tower, Siphesihle entered the executive floor, chin lifted high. Her father stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city below. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Themba Zondi turned slowly. "I did," he said. "Sit." She hesitated, then obeyed. He did not raise his voice. That unsettled her more than anger ever had. "Do you know what respect costs?" he asked calmly. Siphesihle frowned. "Of course I do." "Tell me," he said. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Themba exhaled slowly. "Respect is not something you demand. It's something you earn. And once lost, it is expensive to buy back." Siphesihle shifted uncomfortably. "Why are we talking about this?" "Because I received a call," Themba said, "from an old colleague. He asked me a strange question." Her heart began to race. What question? He asked me whether I had raised my daughter to understand consequences. Siphesihle's breath caught. "Who called you?" Themba looked at her steadily. "Someone whose opinion matters." She stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong." Themba did not react. "Sit," he repeated softly. She froze, then sat back down. "There's a meeting in 1 hour," he said. "A man will walk through that door. I want you to watch carefully. Watch what," she asked, her voice tighter now. "Watch who he is." Themba replied, "And how he chooses to respond." Siphesihle swallowed. The hour passed slowly. Too slowly. Siphesihle's phone vibrated again, and this time she couldn't ignore it. A message from an unknown number. "Do you know who you slapped today?" Her chest tightened. She typed back quickly. "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then the reply came. "Someone who knows." Her fingers trembled. She locked the phone and looked up just as the boardroom doors opened. Executives entered first, then advisors, then lawyers, and then... The man from the street stepped inside. Amadou Ba. He wore the same calm expression, the same steady posture, the same eyes. Only now he wore a tailored suit, perfectly cut, immaculate, quietly powerful. Siphesihle felt the blood drain from her face. Her mind raced, searching for explanations. Coincidence, illusion, misunderstanding. But none fit. The room itself responded to him differently. People stood straighter, voices lowered, attention shifted. Amadou met her gaze for just a second. There was no anger in his eyes, no triumph, only recognition. Siphesihle's world tilted. She understood then, not fully but enough. The slap had not vanished. It had followed him, and now it had followed her here. Siphesihle Zondi had always believed her father's boardroom was the safest place in the world. It was where strangers became careful, where men who shouted in public spoke softly, where people who felt powerful outside suddenly remembered manners. Money and influence lived here like invisible guards. But as Amadou Ba stepped fully into the room, Siphesihle realized something terrifying. This boardroom wasn't protecting her. It was exposing her. Her throat tightened as she watched him move past the door with the same calm dignity he had shown on the street. Only now, the calm looked different. On the street, it had seemed like weakness. In this room, it looked like control. Amadou's suit was dark and simple, not flashy, but it fit him like it was stitched for purpose. He didn't wear loud jewelry, no exaggerated watch, no gold chains, nothing to announce wealth. He didn't need to. Power was in the way people responded to him. Kwame Mensah rose first, offering a respectful nod. "Mr. Ba." Then the legal team stood, then the executives. Even Siphesihle's father shifted his posture as if the air had changed density. "Welcome, Chairman Themba Zondi," said, extending his hand. Amadou clasped it firmly, not trying to dominate, not trying to impress. "Just equal," Chairman Zondi Amadou replied. Siphesihle's mind screamed, "No, this can't be him, this can't be the same man," but it was. The cheek she had struck earlier looked perfectly normal, now no bruise, no mark. That somehow made it worse, like her cruelty had been too small to even leave a trace on him. Amadou's gaze drifted toward her. Siphesihle's breath stopped. She expected hatred, judgment, public revenge. Instead, his eyes held something else, a quiet sadness and a warning. He looked away before she could breathe again. A chair scraped. "Please," Themba said, gesturing to the table. "We're honored to host you." Everyone sat in careful unison. Siphesihle sat too, but her hands were cold. Her heart hammered like it was trying to escape her ribs. A lawyer began speaking terms, clauses, deadlines. Words flowed, but Siphesihle barely heard them. She kept staring at Amadou's hands, steady, still patient. Those hands. The hands she had treated like trash on the street. Those hands were about to sign a deal worth more than everything she had ever earned, touched, or deserved. She swallowed hard. Her father leaned slightly toward her. In a low voice, he whispered, "Do you know him?" Siphesihle's mouth went dry. "No," she lied too quickly. Themba's eyes narrowed, not fully convinced. Amadou listened to the lawyers with calm focus. When someone asked a question, he answered precisely. When a clause needed adjustment, he suggested it without arrogance. He was not here to win. He was here to build. That made Siphesihle feel even smaller. Because she had not slapped an arrogant man. She had slapped a disciplined one. A man who didn't need to crush people to prove he was powerful. Minutes passed. The meeting moved closer to the final document. Then Kwame Mensah cleared his throat. "Before we sign," he said, "Mr. Ba requested a short personal statement." Siphesihle's stomach sank. Themba nodded. "Of course, Mr. Ba, please." Amadou folded his hands lightly on the table. The room held its breath. He spoke in a calm voice, the kind that didn't fight for attention because attention naturally leaned toward it. "Chairman Zondi Amadou, began this partnership has been discussed for months. The numbers are strong. The strategic benefits are clear. But I've learned something over the years." He paused, letting the silence do its work. "The character of a company is not proven by its profits," he continued. "It's proven by how its people treat those they believe have no power." Siphesihle felt heat rush to her face. Her father's jaw tightened slightly. Amadou's voice remained even. "In every city, there are men and women who are invisible. They serve, they build, they sell, they clean. They are easy to ignore, easy to insult, easy to hurt." Siphesihle's fingers curled under the table. Amadou glanced around the room, then landed his gaze on Siphesihle, not for long, but long enough to pin her in place. "This morning," he said softly, "I met someone who reminded me how quickly dignity can be stolen in public." A quiet ripple moved through the room. Some executives exchanged looks. The legal team glanced at each other with confusion. Themba Zondi's eyes sharpened. Siphesihle wanted to disappear. Amadou continued. "I will still sign this deal," he said, "because the future of thousands of workers shouldn't collapse because of one person's failure." Siphesihle's chest clenched, relief and shame mixing like poison. But Amadou added, voice firming slightly, "I need assurance that the values of this partnership extend beyond the table, that respect is not optional outside these walls. He turned to Themba. Chairman Zondi, I've studied your leadership. You've built much, but every empire is tested by what happens when its children believe they are untouchable. That landed like a blade. Themba's face tightened, not with anger, but with pain. Siphesihle's father had never been spoken to like that in his own boardroom. Siphesihle expected him to explode, but Themba did something worse. He went silent. Themba stared at his daughter slowly, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. His eyes held disappointment so deep it looked like grief. Siphesihle felt tears sting, not because she was sorry yet, but because she was trapped, exposed. Thank you, Themba said at last, voice controlled. Your point is taken. Amadou nodded once. Then let's proceed. The legal team slid the final documents forward. A pen was placed near Amadou's hand. Siphesihle's breath became shallow. This was it, the moment her slap collided with her father's legacy. The pen touched paper. Amadou signed, smooth, certain, unhurried. $2 billion crossed from possibility into reality. Then Themba signed. Applause rose, polite, controlled, relieved. Hands shook, smiles appeared. But Siphesihle couldn't clap. Her palms were damp, her mind was spinning. Because in the middle of all that celebration she realized something horrifying. Amadou had not destroyed her. He had spared her, and that mercy made her feel smaller than any punishment could have. When the meeting ended, executives filed out. Lawyers gathered papers. People began talking again, louder now, relieved the deal was complete. Siphesihle remained seated, frozen, staring at the table. Amadou stood collecting his folder. Aissatou Diallo moved beside him, whispering something. He nodded. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Siphesihle's body moved before her pride could stop it. She stood quickly. Wait. The word came out cracked. The room quieted slightly. Amadou paused but didn't turn fully. Yes, he said calmly. Siphesihle's voice trembled despite her effort. I didn't know. Amadou finally faced her. His eyes were steady. No, he said softly. You didn't. The simplicity of it cut her deeper than shouting would have. Siphesihle swallowed. Amadou raised a hand gently, not to silence her with dominance, but with calm. You didn't know who I was, he said, but you knew who you were choosing to be. Siphesihle felt her throat tighten again. Tears threatened. Around them, people pretended not to listen, but everyone was listening. Amadou's voice stayed low, almost private. I hope you remember today, he said. Not because I'm important, but because every person you meet is. Then he turned and walked out. Siphesihle stood there shaking while the echoes of his words filled the room. And for the first time in her life, she understood the world was not punishing her because she slapped a powerful man. It was punishing her because she had become the kind of person who would slap anyone at all. The silence Amadou Ba left behind was heavier than any accusation. Siphesihle Zondi stood where he had left her, feeling as if the walls of the boardroom were slowly closing in. Conversations resumed around her, low and cautious, but she could sense the shift. Eyes avoided her. Voices dropped when she passed. Respect had not vanished completely, but it had cracked, and once cracked, it never sounded the same again. Her father remained seated, hands folded on the table, staring at the signature pages as if they held answers he didn't want to read. Themba Zondi had faced crises before: market collapses, political pressure, hostile takeovers. None of them felt like this. This one lived in his chest. Everyone out, he said quietly. The room emptied almost immediately. Advisors gathered their things and left without comment. Lawyers nodded politely and disappeared. Even the security staff stepped back. Within moments, only 3 people remained: Themba, Siphesihle, and Nomusa. Nomusa Zondi had entered without announcement, drawn by instinct rather than schedule. She had seen the way people exited the room, their expressions carefully blank. She had seen her daughter standing stiffly, her father unmoving. She knew. Themba did not look up when he spoke. Tell me the truth. Siphesihle's heart pounded. About what? About the man, Themba said. About what happened this morning. Siphesihle opened her mouth, ready to defend herself as she always had. The excuses lined up neatly. He bumped into me. He disrespected me. People were watching. But something stopped her. Amadou's words echoed in her mind. You knew who you were choosing to be. Her voice came out weaker than she expected. We collided on the street. And then Themba asked. She swallowed. I got angry. And then Nomusa said gently. Siphesihle's eyes burned. I slapped him. Themba finally looked up, not with fury, with disappointment. A long, painful silence stretched between them. "You slapped the man who just signed the most important deal of this company's history," Themba said slowly, not knowing who he was. Siphesihle nodded. "Yes, that's not the worst part." Themba continued. "The worst part is that you slapped a man you believed had no power." Siphesihle flinched. Namusa stepped closer, placing a hand on her daughter's arm. "Siphesihle," she said softly, "do you know how many people watched that video?" Siphesihle shook her head. "Enough," Namusa replied. "Enough to remember." Tears spilled over now, uninvited. "I didn't think," Siphesihle whispered. "I was angry." He spoke back to me. Themba stood. He walked toward the window, looking out at the city he had built his empire in. From up here, the people below were tiny, moving dots with stories he could not see. "That man," Themba said quietly, "could have destroyed us today." Siphesihle's breath caught, but he didn't. "No." Themba agreed. He showed restraint. "Something you failed to do," the words landed hard. "You will not attend board meetings for the foreseeable future," Themba continued. "You will not represent this family in public, and you will not use my name to excuse your behavior." Siphesihle looked up sharply. "You're punishing me. I'm protecting what little dignity you have left," Themba replied. Namusa squeezed Siphesihle's arm. "Listen to him." Siphesihle nodded slowly, tears still falling. For the first time, she did not argue. Across the city, Amadou sat in the back of a car, watching buildings pass by in reflective silence. Aissatou Diallo sat beside him, reviewing messages on her tablet. "The media is requesting statements," she said. "Some are already calling this a lesson in humility." Amadou exhaled softly. "I don't need a headline. They'll create one anyway," Aissatou replied. He nodded. "Let them." "I didn't do this to teach the public. I did it to remain myself." Aissatou looked at him. "You could have humiliated her. Publicly. No one would have blamed you." "I know," Amadou said. "Why didn't you?" Amadou leaned his head back, eyes closing briefly. "Because humiliation teaches fear," he said, "and fear doesn't change people, it only hardens them." The car slowed as they approached another building. "This city," Amadou continued, "has too many people who were once hurt and decided to pass that pain forward." Aissatou nodded slowly. "Do you think she'll change?" Amadou opened his eyes. "That depends on whether shame becomes reflection or resentment." That evening, Siphesihle sat alone in her childhood bedroom. The room was large, carefully decorated, untouched by struggle. She had always loved it. Tonight it felt like a cage. Her phone lay on the bed beside her screen, dark. She had turned off notifications hours ago. Still, she imagined the comments, the whispers, the looks she would face when she stepped outside again. She picked up the phone and unlocked it. Against her better judgment, she searched the video. She watched it in full for the first time. Not just the slap, but what came before and after, her posture, her expression. The way the man staggered slightly, then steadied himself, the way he did not raise his voice. She watched herself like a stranger. She didn't like who she saw. Her chest tightened. For the first time, the question wasn't, "What will people think of me?" It was, "Who have I become?" She dropped the phone and buried her face in her hands. Late that night, Themba sat alone in his study, a glass of untouched drink on the desk. Namusa entered quietly. "You didn't eat." "I'm not hungry," he replied. She sat across from him. "You did the right thing." He sighed. "Did I?" "She needed boundaries," Namusa said, "not excuses." Themba stared at the desk. "I gave her everything except humility." Namusa reached across, touching his hand. "It's not too late." He looked up at her. "What if she never forgives me?" Namusa smiled sadly. "Then at least she'll understand you." The next morning, Amadou received a message. It was from an unknown number. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to apologize." He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Apologies are not proven by words alone." There was a pause. Then a reply. "Tell me how to make it right." Amadou set the phone down, thoughtful. Outside, the city stirred again, unaware that a quiet transformation had begun. One that would test whether remorse could grow into responsibility, and whether Siphesihle Zondi was capable of becoming someone worthy of it. The message Amadou Ba sent did not leave Siphesihle Zondi's mind for a single moment. Apologies are not proven by words alone. She read it again and again, sitting on the edge of her bed long after midnight had passed. The room was quiet, But her thoughts were loud, louder than the city outside, louder than the shame she tried to push away. For most of her life, words had been enough. "I'm sorry" had fixed broken friendships. "I didn't mean it" had erased consequences. Her last name had always done the rest. Doors reopened, mistakes softened, people moved on, but this man, the one she had slapped, had refused to play that game. Siphesihle dropped her phone beside her and lay back staring at the ceiling. Sleep came late and restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same image: Amadou standing calmly in the boardroom, untouched by her power, untouched by her cruelty. When morning came, it brought no relief. Siphesihle woke early, something she almost never did. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating a room that suddenly felt too clean, too perfect, the kind of room that had never known consequences. She dressed simply that day. No designer dress, no heels, just flat shoes, jeans, and a plain blouse. She didn't do it for attention. She did it because anything else felt dishonest. Downstairs, Namusa was already awake preparing tea. Her mother looked up in surprise. "You're up early." Siphesihle nodded. "I couldn't sleep." Namusa studied her quietly. "Neither could your father." Siphesihle winced. "Is he angry?" Namusa shook her head. "No, he's hurt." "That's different." Siphesihle sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the warm cup her mother placed in front of her. "I want to make things right," she said softly. Namusa met her gaze. "Then start by listening." Siphesihle nodded. "I received a message from him. Amadou." Namusa didn't look surprised. "And he said—" "Words aren't enough," Siphesihle replied. "I don't know what to do." Namusa leaned back slightly. "Then perhaps you should ask yourself a harder question." Siphesihle frowned. "What question?" "Who would you help," Namusa said, "if no one ever knew?" The words settled deep. Later that morning, Siphesihle left the house without her usual driver. She walked instead, feeling the city under her feet for the first time in a long while. The pavement was uneven. The sun was harsh. People brushed past her without recognition. It was uncomfortable. It was real. She passed the same street where the slap had happened. Her chest tightened. The fruit vendor was still there, the same woman from the day before. Siphesihle hesitated, then approached slowly. "Excuse me," Siphesihle said quietly. The woman looked up, a recognition flashing across her face. Her expression hardened slightly. "Yes," Siphesihle swallowed. I'm sorry about yesterday." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Sorry you were filmed, or sorry you did it?" The question struck like a slap of its own. Siphesihle lowered her eyes. "Sorry I did it." The woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "People come here every day with money," she said. "Very few come with humility." Siphesihle nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness." The woman shrugged. "Good. Forgiveness is earned." Siphesihle bought fruit she didn't need and walked away, heart pounding. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. Across town, Amadou sat in a modest conference room meeting with community leaders about a separate initiative, one that never made headlines. He listened more than he spoke, asking questions about housing, education, access. His phone buzzed quietly. Aissatou glanced at it. "It's her again." Amadou nodded but didn't reach for it immediately. "Let it wait." They continued the meeting. Promises were not made lightly. Commitments were measured carefully. When it ended, Amadou finally checked the message. "I don't know how to make this right yet, but I'm trying to learn. If you ever allow it, I want to listen." Amadou read it once, then twice. He set the phone down without replying. That afternoon, Siphesihle faced her next reckoning. Her father called her into his study. "You're going to work today," Zondi said. Siphesihle blinked. "Work?" "Yes," he replied calmly. "Not here. Not with me." She waited. "There's a logistics center on the east side of the city." Themba continued. "It supplies materials to our infrastructure projects. You'll report there every morning for the next month." Siphesihle's stomach dropped. "What will I do?" "You'll assist," he said. "You'll observe. You'll learn how many people your decisions affect, people whose names you've never known." Siphesihle nodded slowly. "Okay." "You won't introduce yourself as my daughter," Themba added. "You'll introduce yourself as Siphesihle." That hurt more than she expected, but she didn't protest. The logistics center was nothing like the offices she knew. It was loud, dusty, full of movement. Trucks rolled in and out constantly. Workers carried loads under the sun, sweat darkening their shirts. A supervisor handed her gloves without ceremony. "You can start by helping with inventory," he said. Siphesihle stared at the gloves for a moment, then put them on. Her hands weren't used to this kind of work. By midday they ached, her back burned. The sun was unforgiving. At one point she nearly snapped at a worker who brushed past her, then caught herself. She remembered Amadou's calm. She took a breath instead. During a short break she sat beside a woman who looked about her mother's age, eating from a small container. "You're new," the woman said. "Yes," Siphesihle replied. "First week is always the hardest," the woman smiled. "But you'll survive." Siphesihle hesitated. "Do you ever feel invisible?" The woman chuckled softly. "Only to people who don't matter." Siphesihle absorbed that in silence. That evening, Siphesihle returned home exhausted, hand-sore pride bruised in ways she didn't hate. She picked up her phone again and typed slowly. "I spent today working where my name means nothing. It was hard. I think it should be." She sent the message unsure if it would ever be read. Amadou read it hours later, sitting alone with a cup of tea. He leaned back thoughtful. Aissatou noticed his expression. "She's persistent." "Yes," Amadou replied. "Persistence can be ego, or it can be growth." "Which do you think this is?" Aissatou asked. Amadou considered. "Too early to tell." He typed a response. "Learning is uncomfortable. That's how you know it's real." Siphesihle read the message with trembling hands. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. And for the first time since that slap echoed across the street, hope, quiet, fragile hope, began to take root. The logistics center changed Siphesihle Zondi in ways she hadn't anticipated. By the third day, her hands were no longer soft. By the fifth, she stopped checking the time every few minutes. The dust no longer bothered her as much as the faces did, faces she was finally beginning to see. There was Thabo, who had 3 children and still worked overtime because school fees never waited. There was Zanelli, who laughed easily even when her knees ached from standing all day. There was Musa, who had lost 2 fingers years ago and never complained. They didn't know her last name. They did not care. To them she was simply Siphesihle, the quiet woman who worked harder than expected and listened more than she spoke. And listening, she discovered, was exhausting. Every story carried weight. Every complaint hinted at systems she had never questioned. Delays that seemed minor from a boardroom could mean missed meals, unpaid rent, or children pulled from school. One afternoon, as she struggled to lift a box she clearly shouldn't have been lifting alone, Thabo stepped in to help. "You don't have to prove anything," he said gently. Siphesihle paused, surprised. "Prove what?" He shrugged. "That you belong here." The words settled in her chest. That night she sat in her room, muscles aching, and opened her phone. "Today I learned that power feels very different when you're carrying the weight instead of giving orders." She stared at the message before sending it. She wasn't sure if Amadou wanted updates, or if he wanted distance, or if he wanted nothing at all. She sent it anyway. Amadou Ba read the message the next morning while walking through a schoolyard in a low-income neighborhood. Children laughed as they chased a ball across uneven ground. A building nearby was half-finished, one of the projects his foundation quietly supported, far from press conferences and cameras. A local head teacher walked beside him, explaining shortages and needs with careful politeness. Amadou listened. When the tour ended, the head teacher hesitated. "Thank you for coming in person," she said. "Most people prefer reports." "Reports don't show you where the cracks are," Amadou replied. As he got into the car, Aissatou glanced at his phone. "She's still writing." "Yes," Amadou said simply. And Aissatou pressed. He slipped the phone into his pocket. "I'm watching consistency." Back at the Zondi home, Themba watched his daughter from a distance. She no longer complained at dinner. She no longer dominated conversations. She listened to her mother, to staff, even to silence. It unsettled him. "Do you think she's changed?" Nomusa asked one evening. Themba considered. "I think she's uncomfortable," he said. "That's usually the beginning." Nomusa smiled faintly. "Or the end." The following week brought a test Siphesihle didn't expect. A truck delivery was delayed due to paperwork issues. Tempers flared. Workers argued with supervisors. The heat made everything worse. Siphesihle watched the tension rise like a storm cloud. Her instinct, the old one, urged her to step in sharply, to demand action, to raise her voice and cut through the noise. She felt it in her chest. Then she remembered the street, the slap. She took a breath instead. What's the problem? She asked a supervisor calmly. He explained. She listened. She asked questions. She didn't interrupt. When she spoke again, it was quiet. What if we reroute the afternoon shift and use the waiting time to update inventory? The supervisor blinked. That could work. Within an hour, the chaos eased. No applause followed. No recognition. But the work continued. And for the first time in her life, Siphesihle felt proud of something no one could see. That night, she wrote again. I stopped myself from reacting today. It felt harder than lifting boxes. She hesitated, then added, I understand now why silence can be powerful. Amadou read the message late after a long day. He didn't respond immediately. He remembered a younger version of himself, angry, brilliant, eager to prove worth to people who never intended to see it. He remembered mentors who taught him restraint not as weakness, but as strategy. He typed slowly. Silence is not the absence of strength, it's the control of it. Siphesihle read the reply and closed her eyes. For the first time, she felt seen not as a mistake, but as a work in progress. The month passed faster than she expected. Her last day at the logistics center arrived quietly. No ceremony, no speeches. Zanelli hugged her. Don't disappear, she said. Siphesihle smiled sadly. I won't. Thabo nodded. Remember us when you go back to your world. Siphesihle swallowed. This is my world too. She meant it. The following morning, Themba called her into his study again. You've completed the assignment, he said. Siphesihle nodded. Yes. He studied her for a long moment. What did you learn? She answered without hesitation. That authority without empathy is just noise. Themba leaned back, surprised, then thoughtful. You won't return to the board yet, he said, but you'll work with our community oversight teams. Siphesihle bowed her head slightly. Thank you. As she turned to leave, Themba added, There's one more thing. She paused. I spoke with Amadou Ba, he said. Her heart jumped. You did? Yes, Themba replied. He agreed to meet you. Her breath caught. When tomorrow, Themba said, not as a businessman, as a man. The meeting place was simple, a small public garden near the city center. No security, no cameras. Siphesihle arrived early, hands clasped tightly in front of her. When Amadou approached, dressed plainly again, she stood instinctively. I didn't come to argue, she said quickly, or to justify. Amadou nodded. Good. They sat on opposite sides of a bench. Siphesihle took a deep breath. I won't ask you to forgive me, she said. I know that's not mine to demand. Amadou listened. I only want you to know, she continued, voice steady but emotional, that I'm trying to become someone who would never do that again, to anyone. Amadou remained silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. Change is not proven by effort alone, he said. It's proven by what you do when no one is watching. Siphesihle nodded. I understand. He stood. Then keep going. She looked up. Is that all? Amadou met her eyes, for now. As he walked away, Siphesihle remained seated, tears slipping down her cheeks. Not of shame this time, but of resolve. She had not been forgiven, but she had been given something rarer, a chance to earn it. The garden felt quieter after Amadou Ba walked away. Siphesihle Zondi remained seated on the bench long after he disappeared into the moving crowd, her hands resting on her knees, her shoulders tense but steady. She replayed every word he had said, not searching for comfort but for direction. He had not offered reassurance. He had not offered condemnation either. He had offered distance, and somehow that distance felt fair. When she finally stood to leave, the city felt different again. Not smaller, not larger, just more honest. People passed her without recognition, no whispers, no stares. The world was not pausing to watch her learn humility. It was moving on, and she would have to move with it. The following week, the consequences of that slap reached further than Siphesihle had imagined. The video, which had once felt like a personal nightmare, became a reference point in public discussions. Radio hosts debated entitlement culture, comment sections filled with arguments about power privilege and public accountability. Some defended her, many did not. Siphesihle did not respond. Her father advised silence, and for once, she agreed. Instead, she reported daily to the Community Oversight Office, a small underfunded unit responsible for monitoring how corporate projects affected neighborhoods. It was slow work. Paperwork heavy, uncomfortable, perfect. Her supervisor, an older man named Sibusiso, did not treat her gently. He didn't treat her harshly either. He treated her like someone who needed to earn trust. You don't fix damage by being visible, he told her on the first day. You fix it by staying. Siphesihle stayed. She attended meetings in cramped rooms where residents voiced frustrations they had carried for years. She took notes, she followed up, she made phone calls no one expected her to make. Sometimes people recognized her, sometimes they did not. When they did, the room often went quiet. On one such afternoon, a man stood abruptly and pointed at her. "You're the one," he said, "from the video." Siphesihle's chest tightened. "Yes," she said, "I am." The room waited. She bowed her head slightly. "I don't have excuses," she continued, "only responsibility. I'm here to listen." The man stared at her for a long moment, then sat back down. The meeting continued. That night, Siphesihle returned home emotionally drained but grounded. She wrote to Amadou again, not asking for approval, not narrating progress, just reporting facts. "I sat in rooms where people didn't trust me today. I didn't try to change that. I listened." Amadou read the message hours later while reviewing project proposals. He set the document aside. "She's still writing," Isatou observed. "Yes," Amadou replied. "Does it matter?" Isatou asked. Amadou leaned back. "It matters that she's not asking me to make it matter." Meanwhile, Chairman Amadou Zondi faced his own reckoning. Partners congratulated him on the successful deal, but the praise felt hollow. The company's stock rose, projects expanded, and yet everywhere he went he sensed something had shifted. His name still carried weight, but his family name carried questions. One evening, a longtime associate pulled him aside. "You handled the situation well," the man said quietly. Themba raised an eyebrow. "Which situation?" "The one with your daughter," the associate replied. "Many would have buried it." Themba nodded slowly. "Burying rot doesn't remove it." That night he sat alone in his study again, reflecting on the years he had spent shielding Siphesihle from discomfort. He realized something painful but necessary. He had taught her success, but not restraint. The next public test came unexpectedly. A community forum was organized to discuss upcoming infrastructure expansion. A forum Siphesihle was scheduled to attend as part of her new role. The room was packed. Tension was high. Cameras were present, though unofficial. Siphesihle entered quietly, taking a seat near the back. The moderator introduced speakers. Residents voiced concerns. Then, halfway through, someone raised their voice. "Why is she here?" a woman demanded, pointing at Siphesihle. "Is this another performance?" The room stirred. Siphesihle felt the familiar heat rise in her chest, the old reflex to defend, to assert, to control. Her jaw tightened. She stood. "I didn't come to speak," she said clearly. "I came to listen." The woman crossed her arms. "Listening didn't stop you before." Siphesihle nodded. "You're right." The room went quiet. "I can't undo what I did." Siphesihle continued. "I can only decide who I am when I'm uncomfortable." The moderator shifted nervously. Siphesihle turned to the woman. "If you don't want me here, I'll leave," she said. "But the issues you're raising still matter, with or without me." A pause. Then the woman sighed. "Sit down," she said. "Just don't pretend." Siphesihle sat. The forum continued. Later that evening, a short clip from the forum circulated online, not of anger, not of drama, but of restraint. The comments were quieter this time, more cautious. Some people noticed. Amadou noticed too. Days later, Amadou invited Siphesihle to a second meeting. This time it wasn't one-on-one. It was a community roundtable he supported, bringing together residents, workers, and project managers. Siphesihle was not announced. She was not introduced. She was simply present. Throughout the meeting, she spoke only when addressed. She deferred. She took notes. She asked follow-up questions without centering herself. At the end, Amadou stood. "Thank you all," he said. "Progress happens when voices that are usually ignored are finally heard." He glanced briefly at Siphesihle. She met his eyes, steady. Afterward, as people dispersed, Amadou approached her. "You didn't try to control the room," he said. Siphesihle nodded. "I didn't need to." "That's new," Amadou replied. She smiled faintly. "It's harder than it looks." He studied her for a moment. "You're learning the difference between presence and dominance." Siphesihle swallowed. "Is that enough?" Amadou shook his head slightly. "Not yet." She exhaled. "I didn't think so." They walked a few steps together. "Change isn't a straight line," Amadou said. "People will test you. Some will never forgive you." "I know," Siphesihle replied. "Good," he said. "Then you're not doing this for applause." He stopped. "I don't forgive easily," he added, "but I respect consistency." Siphesihle nodded. "Then I'll keep showing up." Amadou held her gaze for a long moment. "Do that," he said, "and let time speak for you." As he walked away, Siphesihle felt something settle in her chest, not relief, not triumph, commitment. She understood now that redemption was not an event, it was a discipline, and for the first time in her life she was willing to practice it. Time did not soften the memory of the slap. If anything, it sharpened it. For Siphesihle Zondi, every morning began with the same quiet resolve. Show up, do the work, say less. She had stopped counting how many weeks it had been since that day on the street. The number no longer mattered. What mattered was whether her actions could carry weight without her name attached to them. At the community oversight office, Siphesihle noticed the change. "You don't rush to speak anymore," he said one afternoon as they reviewed reports. Siphesihle kept her eyes on the page. "I realized my voice doesn't need to arrive first." Siphesihle nodded slowly. "That realization takes most people a lifetime." She didn't respond. Compliments still made her uneasy. Meanwhile, the partnership between Amadou Ba and the Zondi group moved forward with precision. Projects broke ground quietly. Jobs were created. Communities began to see changes not announced on billboards, but felt in daily routines. Water lines repaired, roads resurfaced, schools expanded. Amadou visited sites regularly, often without notice. He walked through dust and heat, asking workers their names, listening to supervisors explain problems without interruption. He never raised his voice. He never promised what he could not deliver. His reputation grew not as a savior, but as someone predictable. That predictability made people trust him. It also made people curious about Siphesihle. Whispers followed her, less now, replaced by cautious observation. Some still remembered the video. Others remembered her sitting silently through meetings, taking notes when she could have dominated. Not everyone believed her change, and that was fine. The real test came during a crisis no one had planned for. A construction accident occurred at one of the expansion sites, a scaffolding collapse that injured several workers. News spread quickly. Cameras arrived before ambulances had fully left. Panic rose like smoke. Siphesihle was already on site when it happened. She had been there to observe supply delays when the crash echoed through the air. Shouts followed. Dust clouded the scene. People ran. Her heart raced. The old Siphesihle would have panicked outward, shouting orders demanding control. She felt the impulse surge, sharp and familiar. She stopped herself. "Call emergency services," she said calmly to the nearest supervisor. "Now." She moved toward the injured without pushing past medics helping where directed, listening carefully. She took notes. Times, names, conditions, without interfering. When reporters approached, microphones extended, she shook her head. "I'm not the spokesperson," she said. "Focus on the workers." That restraint surprised everyone, including herself. Amadou arrived later that afternoon. He surveyed the scene quietly, speaking first to medics, then to families. He did not allow cameras near the injured. He did not make statements about blame. When he finally noticed Siphesihle standing to the side, dust on her clothes clipboard under her arm, he paused. "You stayed," he said. She nodded. "It wasn't about me." He looked at the workers being assisted. "Good." That night an emergency meeting was called. Executives argued, lawyers advised caution, public relations teams demanded statements. Amadou listened. When it was his turn to speak, he said only one thing. "We will compensate the injured, fully suspend operations until safety reviews are complete, and publish the findings, good or bad." Some protested. That could cost millions. Amadou's gaze was steady. So does silence. Siphesihle watched him closely. This was power she had never witnessed before, not loud, not defensive, not protective of ego, power that accepted consequence. She understood then that her journey and his were intersecting again, not as victim and offender, but as mirrors. Days later, Amadou requested a private meeting with Siphesihle. They met in a modest office far from cameras. "I want to be clear," Amadou began. "This is not forgiveness." Siphesihle nodded. "I understand. It's evaluation," he continued, "of consistency, of intent." She waited. "You handled the crisis well," he said, "not because you were invisible, but because you didn't insert yourself." Siphesihle exhaled quietly. "I remembered what you said. About presence and dominance." Amadou leaned back. "Most people confuse silence with weakness." "I did," she admitted. "Not anymore," he said. There was a pause. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Amadou met her eyes. "Because I'm considering inviting you into a role that requires restraint under pressure." Her heart skipped. "What role?" He did not answer immediately. First he said, "I need to know something." She straightened. Ask. When the cameras turned back on, Amadou said, and praise becomes tempting again. Who will you choose to be? Siphesihle did not answer quickly. She thought of the street, the slap, the boardroom, the logistics center, the accident site, the meetings where she spoke last or not at all. I will choose the person who can live with herself when no one is watching, she said finally. Amadou studied her. That answer, he said, is better than an apology. The invitation came a week later. Not public, not formal. Amadou asked Siphesihle to join a joint ethics oversight committee, independent, underfunded, powerful, only in its ability to recommend change and expose failure. Her father was surprised. You're giving her influence again? Themba asked privately. I'm giving her responsibility, Amadou replied. There's a difference. Siphesihle accepted without hesitation. The work was grueling. Reviews were tense. Recommendations were often ignored. Sometimes they were acted upon quietly. Siphesihle learned patience at a deeper level. She also learned that some people would never forget the slap. One afternoon, a worker confronted her after a meeting. Why should we trust you? He asked bluntly. She met his gaze. You shouldn't, she replied. Not yet. That honesty disarmed him more than defensiveness ever could. Months passed. The video faded from headlines, replaced by other scandals, other villains. But within the communities affected by the project, something shifted. People noticed patterns, safety protocols improving response times, shortening meetings, becoming less performative. They didn't know Siphesihle's story. They felt her impact anyway. One evening after a long day, Amadou and Siphesihle walked out of a meeting together. You've been consistent, Amadou said. She nodded. So have you. He stopped walking. I want to be clear about something. She waited. I don't forget harm easily, he said, but I do recognize growth. Her throat tightened. Is that forgiveness? Amadou shook his head slightly. No. Then he added, but it's trust in progress. Siphesihle felt emotion rise sharp and unexpected. She kept her voice steady. Thank you. Amadou nodded. Don't waste it. As they parted ways, Siphesihle understood something she hadn't. Before, redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about carrying it responsibly into the future. And for the first time, she believed she could. The first time Siphesihle Zondi was asked to speak publicly again, she almost refused. The invitation came quietly, not from a media outlet, not from a flashy conference, but from a workers' forum organized by the Ethics Oversight Committee. No cameras were promised, no headlines guaranteed, just a room full of people who had been affected by decisions made far above their heads. Still, the request unsettled her. She stared at the email for a long time, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Old instincts whispered warnings. This is how it starts again. This is how people misunderstand you. New instincts argued back. This is not about you anymore. She forwarded the email to Amadou with a single line. I've been asked to speak. I'm not sure if I should. The reply came hours later. Speak if you're willing to be questioned. Stay silent if you're hoping to be praised. Siphesihle closed her laptop. Decision made. The forum was held in a modest community hall with peeling paint and uneven chairs. Workers filled the room early, some curious, some skeptical. Siphesihle arrived without entourage, without title. She wore simple clothes and sat near the front, hands folded. When her name was called, a murmur passed through the room. She stood slowly. I wasn't invited here to explain myself, she began. I was invited to listen and to answer, if asked. She paused, letting the words settle. I won't tell you. I've changed, she continued. That's not for me to declare. I can only tell you what I'm doing differently. A hand shot up immediately. A man stood. Why should we believe you? He asked. We all saw that video. Siphesihle nodded. You should believe the video, she said. It shows exactly who I was. The room went quiet. Another voice followed. And now Siphesihle replied, I'm learning to be accountable even when it costs me comfort, reputation, or opportunity. Questions came fast after that. Sharp ones, uncomfortable ones. Do you still benefit from your father's power? Yes, she answered honestly, but less blindly than before. Would you have cared if there were no consequences? She swallowed. I don't know, and that answer shames me. Some people nodded, others frowned. She didn't rush to fill the silence. When the forum ended, applause was sparse but real, not enthusiastic, not forgiving, respectful. Outside, Amadou waited. You didn't defend yourself, he observed. There was nothing to defend. Siphesihle replied. He nodded once. That matters. Chairman Themba Zondi watched the recording later that evening. He sat alone in his study, replaying sections, pausing often. He had seen his daughter speak publicly many times before, confident, commanding, polished. This was different. She did not dominate the room. She did not bend it to her will. She allowed it to challenge her. When the video ended, Themba leaned back, eyes closed. Nomusa entered quietly. You watched it. Yes, he said, and Themba exhaled slowly. I see now what I failed to teach her. Nomusa sat beside him. And what's that? How to lose without becoming bitter, he replied. How to be small without feeling erased. Nomusa reached for his hand. She's learning now. Yes, Themba said softly, at a cost. The next crisis arrived without warning. An internal report surfaced when Siphesihle herself had helped draft exposing negligence in a subcontractor's safety compliance. The findings were serious enough to threaten project delays and legal scrutiny. The board reacted swiftly. Emergency meetings were called. Advisors urged containment. Some suggested burying the report until the timing improved. Siphesihle sat through the argument silently. Then she spoke. We release it, she said calmly. The room turned. That would damage confidence. An executive snapped. It would preserve trust, she replied. Eyes shifted toward Amadou. He didn't speak immediately. Finally he said, we release it. The decision rippled outward like shockwaves. Press statements followed. Stock prices dipped. Headlines flared. Siphesihle felt the weight of it not as fear but as responsibility. That night she received a message from her father. Come to my office. She arrived to find him standing by the window again, city lights reflecting in the glass. You're costing this company money, Themba said without turning. Siphesihle nodded. I know. Why, he asked. Because silence would cost people safety, she replied. He turned then, studying her carefully. You're no longer afraid of consequences, he said. I am, Siphesihle answered. I'm just more afraid of becoming who I was. Themba's expression shifted, pain, pride, regret colliding. You remind me of myself, he said quietly. Before success taught me shortcuts. Siphesihle's voice trembled. I don't want shortcuts. Themba nodded slowly. Then you'll go further than I did. Public reaction to the report was mixed. Some praised the transparency. Others accused the companies involved of recklessness. Online commentators resurrected the slap video, weaving it into narratives of hypocrisy and redemption. Siphesihle did not respond. She focused on follow-ups, on safety reviews, on families affected. One afternoon, while visiting a site undergoing inspection, a worker approached her hesitantly. My brother was injured last year, he said. Nothing happened. This time, something did. Siphesihle felt a lump rise in her throat. I'm sorry it took this long. He nodded. Just don't stop. She didn't promise. She simply said, I won't. Later that week, Amadou invited Siphesihle for a walk, not a meeting, not a review. They walked through a quiet park at dusk. You chose exposure over protection, Amadou said. It felt necessary. Siphesihle replied. It was costly, he noted. Yes. Amadou stopped walking. I want to be clear. She waited. You've earned something, he said. Not forgiveness, not absolution. She nodded, accustomed now to that boundary. You've earned credibility, he continued, with me, and with others who pay attention to patterns. Siphesihle felt emotion tighten her chest. Thank you. Amadou looked at her steadily. Don't thank me. Maintain it. They resumed walking. You know, he added, some people never recover from being publicly wrong. I know, Siphesihle said. I almost didn't. Amadou glanced at her. What stopped you? She thought for a moment, realizing that my worst moment didn't have to be my truest one. He smiled faintly. That realization changes people. That evening, Siphesihle stood on her balcony watching the city lights flicker. She thought of the street, the slap, the silence that followed. She thought of the boardroom, the pen, the words that cut deeper than anger. She thought of workers' faces, of reports released, of trust rebuilt slowly, unevenly. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I saw you speak today. I was there when you slapped him. I didn't think you'd ever face it. Siphesihle typed back carefully. I'm still facing it. A reply came. That's all anyone can ask. She set the phone down. For the first time since that day, she felt something close to peace, not because she had been forgiven, but because she was no longer running from who she had been. and that she realized was its own kind of justice. Forgiveness did not arrive the way Siphesihle Zondi once imagined it would. There was no moment of public absolution, no dramatic handshake, no viral clip announcing redemption. Instead, there was a quieter, more demanding reality, one where every day asked the same question again and again. Will you choose consistency or will you choose comfort? The question followed her everywhere. At the Ethics Oversight Committee meetings grew harder. Recommendations were challenged. Pushback became sharper. People who once tolerated transparency now labeled it disruptive. Progress, Siphesihle learned, was rarely welcomed by those who benefited from the old order. One afternoon during a closed-door review, a senior manager leaned forward and said bluntly, "You're making enemies." Siphesihle met his gaze. "Then I'm probably doing something useful." The room fell silent. Afterward, Siphesihle pulled her aside. "You know," he said, "some people are waiting for you to slip. One mistake and they'll say the change was fake." Siphesihle nodded. "I know. Does that scare you?" he asked. "Yes," she answered honestly, "but not enough to stop." Across the city, Amadou Ba faced a different kind of pressure. The partnership's success had raised expectations. Communities wanted faster results. Investors wanted cleaner optics. Politicians wanted proximity. Amadou refused most invitations. He focused on systems, not ceremonies. Still, his name now carried moral weight, a dangerous thing if misused. He was aware of it, careful not to weaponize his reputation. When people praised him for changing Siphesihle, he corrected them. "She changed herself," he said. "I only refused to lie to her." That refusal would soon be tested. The test came in the form of a lawsuit. A group of contractors accused the Oversight Committee of bias, claiming Siphesihle's presence influenced investigations unfairly. The allegations spread quickly, amplified by old footage, old narratives. Once again, the slap returned. Headlines resurfaced it with renewed appetite. Can someone with a violent past? Judge Ethics. Siphesihle read the article in silence. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from exhaustion. She had known this day would come. Change never erased history. It only challenged how history was used. The board convened an emergency session. Advisors urged suspension. PR teams suggested distance. "Remove her temporarily," one voice insisted, "until this blows over." Siphesihle sat still, listening. Amadou watched quietly from across the table. When the room turned to him, he did not speak immediately. Instead, he looked at Siphesihle. "Do you want to respond?" he asked. She took a breath. "Yes." She stood. "I won't defend my past," she said calmly. "I won't deny it either. But if I'm removed because I once abused power, then anyone who has ever misused authority should step aside as well." Murmurs rippled through the room. She continued, voice steady. "If accountability is selective, it's not accountability. It's optics." Silence followed. Amadou nodded slowly. Agreed. The decision came swiftly after that. Siphesihle would remain, not because she was protected, but because removing her would prove her critics right, that accountability only applied downward. The backlash was immediate. Online commentary flared. Sponsors questioned involvement. Anonymous threats arrived in Siphesihle's inbox. For the first time since her transformation began, doubt crept in. Late one night, she called Amadou. "I don't know if I can keep carrying this," she admitted quietly. "Sometimes it feels like I'm paying for something I can never fully repay." Amadou listened without interrupting. When she finished, he spoke slowly. "You're right," he said. "You can't repay it." She closed her eyes. "Redemption isn't a transaction," he continued. "It's a commitment, and commitments are heavy." She swallowed. "How do you carry it?" "You don't," Amadou replied. "You let it change how you walk." The words grounded her. A week later, Siphesihle faced her most personal challenge yet. A young woman approached her after a site inspection, hesitation written across her face. "I used to admire you," the woman said, "before the video." Siphesihle nodded. "I understand." "I stopped," the woman continued. "I thought if that's what success does to you, I don't want it." Siphesihle's chest tightened. "That's fair." The woman hesitated. "But now, I see you here, doing this work, being challenged." Siphesihle waited. "I'm trying to understand," the woman said. "Is change really possible?" Siphesihle thought carefully before answering. "Yes," she said finally, "but it's not dramatic. It's boring, it's repetitive, and it costs you the version of yourself you were proud of." The woman nodded slowly. Thank you. As she walked away, Siphesihle felt something shift. This wasn't forgiveness, it was influence earned the hard way. Amadou observed Siphesihle from a distance during a regional summit weeks later. She sat among technical staff, not on the stage. She spoke only when asked. When challenged, she didn't harden. When praised, she deflected. Consistency. That was what Amadou watched for. At the end of the summit, he approached her. You've crossed a threshold, he said. Siphesihle looked up. What threshold? The one where people stop waiting for you to fail, Amadou replied, and start wondering how far you'll go. She exhaled. That feels heavier. It is, he agreed. Because now you represent possibility. She frowned slightly. I didn't ask for that. No one ever does, Amadou said, but leadership arrives anyway. They walked together toward the exit. Tell me something, Siphesihle said quietly. If I hadn't changed, would you have destroyed us that day? Amadou considered the question. No, he said. I would have walked away. She looked at him. Even after the slap, yes, he replied, because power that needs revenge is already compromised. Siphesihle absorbed that in silence. Months passed. Projects stabilized. Lawsuits faded. The oversight committee gained credibility. Slowly, trust replaced suspicion. The slap became a footnote, not erased but contextualized. One evening, Siphesihle received a message from a former critic. I still don't like what you did, but I respect what you're doing. She stared at the screen, then smiled faintly. That was enough. On a quiet afternoon, Amadou and Siphesihle met again at the same garden where they had first spoken. This is where it started, she said softly. This is where it clarified. Amadou corrected. She nodded. I used to think justice meant balance, pain for pain, and now he asked. Now I think justice means interruption, she replied, stopping harm before it spreads. Amadou smiled just slightly. That's a rare understanding. They sat in silence for a moment. You know, Siphesihle said I don't expect forgiveness from you. Amadou met her gaze. Good, she smiled sadly. But I hope one day you'll trust me completely. Amadou stood. I already do. Her breath caught. Not because you're flawless, he added, but because you're accountable. As he walked away, Siphesihle remained seated, letting the weight of those words settle. She finally understood the slap had not defined her. What defined her was everything she chose to do after it. The city did not announce when it finally accepted Siphesihle Zondi again. There were no banners, no apologies shouted across streets. Acceptance arrived the way trust always did, quietly, unevenly, almost reluctantly. It showed up in small permissions. A seat at a table she once hovered near, a question directed to her without suspicion, a pause in conversation that meant people were actually listening. And with acceptance came a new danger, comfort. Siphesihle felt it first during a routine meeting when someone deferred to her suggestion without challenge. She noticed it again when a junior staff member hesitated before disagreeing. The old reflex stirred the urge to take the space offered, to fill it confidently, to enjoy being heard. She recognized the feeling instantly. It scared her. After the meeting, she lingered behind as others filed out. Did I speak too much? She asked Siphesihle quietly. He looked surprised. You spoke when it mattered. That's not what I asked, she said. He studied her, then smiled slightly. You're afraid of becoming comfortable. Yes, she admitted. I don't trust who I am when I'm comfortable. Siphesihle nodded. Then you're safer than most leaders I know. Across the city, Amadou Ba faced a crossroads of his own. The partnership had stabilized. The ethics framework he insisted on had begun to ripple outward, adopted by other companies eager to borrow credibility. Invitations poured in global forums, keynote speeches, awards. He declined most of them. But one invitation gave him pause. An International Development Council requested that he nominate a regional representative, someone to help shape policy beyond the immediate projects, someone who could speak with credibility, not just authority. Aissatou raised an eyebrow when she read the brief. They want influence, she said, and optics. They want continuity, Amadou replied. And who are you thinking of? She asked, already suspecting the answer. Amadou didn't respond immediately. The test arrived unexpectedly, disguised as opportunity. A large multinational firm announced interest in acquiring a minority stake in one of the joint infrastructure projects. The offer was generous. The conditions were subtle. Buried in the documents was a clause that would reduce community oversight in exchange for accelerated timelines. Siphesihle spotted it during review. She flagged it immediately. The response came quickly dismissive. "It's standard one," executive said. "We can compensate later." Siphesihle felt the familiar tension rise. "Later doesn't protect people now. This deal would bring capital," another voice argued. "Do you want to slow progress?" Siphesihle looked around the room. Progress, that word again. She thought of the street, of the slap, of the months she spent relearning what power did when it wasn't questioned. "I want to slow harm," she said evenly. Silence followed. Amadou watched from the far end of the table, unreadable. The vote loomed. Siphesihle knew what this meant. Blocking the clause would complicate negotiations. It would annoy powerful people. It would mark her as difficult again. She raised her hand. "I formally recommend rejecting the clause," she said, "or rejecting the deal." A murmur rippled. An executive scoffed. "You're overstepping." Siphesihle met his gaze calmly. "Then correct me with reason, not impatience." The vote passed narrowly in her favor. The deal stalled. That evening, her phone buzzed relentlessly, missed calls, messages, warnings. She ignored them. The backlash came fast. Anonymous sources leaked stories questioning her judgment. Old footage resurfaced again. Commentators framed her as an obstacle to economic growth, a liability masquerading as reform. Siphesihle read none of it. She had learned where attention led. Amadou called her the next morning. "Are you prepared to lose this position?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," she replied. "Even if it costs us momentum?" "Yes." A pause. "Why?" Amadou asked. "Because momentum without integrity is just speed," Siphesihle said, "and speed is how people get hurt." Amadou exhaled slowly. "Good," he said. The multinational withdrew days later, unwilling to accept oversight conditions. Stock prices wavered. Critics sharpened knives. But something else happened too. Community leaders spoke up. Workers' unions issued statements of support. Smaller investors praised transparency. Trust the kind that didn't trend solidified. Amadou watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. That evening he invited Siphesihle to his office. She arrived expecting reprimand. Instead, he handed her a document. "What's this?" she asked. "A nomination," Amadou replied. "For the regional council." Her breath caught. "Why me?" "Because you chose friction over favor," he said. "Because you understand what influence costs." Siphesihle shook her head slowly. "People will question it. They already do." Amadou replied. "Let them." She hesitated. "What if I fail?" Amadou met her eyes. "You will. At some point. The question is whether you'll hide it or face it." She smiled faintly. "I'll face it." He nodded. "That's why." Chairman Themba Zondi learned of the nomination from the press. He sat in his study reading the article twice. Namusa entered quietly. "You look surprised." "I am," Themba said. "Disappointed?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No." Humbled. He thought of the daughter he had shielded, defended, excused. He thought of the woman who now stood firm against pressure he himself once avoided. "She surpassed me," he said softly. Namusa smiled. "She surpassed the version of you that needed to be surpassed." The announcement triggered debate. Panels argued. Opinion pieces clashed. Some praised the symbolism. Others criticized the risk. Siphesihle gave no interviews. She continued her work. At a small community meeting weeks later, a man approached her hesitantly. "I voted against you," he admitted. Siphesihle nodded. "You had reasons." "I still do," he said. "But I wanted you to know you didn't bend." She met his gaze. "Neither should you." He smiled, surprised. The regional council meeting took place months later. Siphesihle sat among seasoned leaders, listening more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was measured, precise, grounded in lived consequence. At one point, a delegate challenged her directly. "You talk about restraint," he said, "but you come from privilege. What do you know of limits?" Siphesihle did not flinch. "I know what happens when limits are ignored," she replied. "I live that moment publicly, and I live its consequences daily." The room fell quiet. Amadou, watching from the observer's gallery, felt something settle. This was no longer redemption. This was leadership. After the session, Siphesihle stepped outside into the evening air. Amadou joined her. You crossed another line today, he said. Which one, she asked. The one where people stop seeing your past as a warning, he replied, and start seeing it as context, she exhaled. That's dangerous. It can be? Amadou agreed, if you forget. She looked at him. I won't. He studied her for a long moment. I believe you, he said. As they parted, Siphesihle realized something profound. The slap that once defined her downfall had become the moment that taught her where power must stop, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure it stopped there. The closer Siphesihle Zondi came to real authority, the more carefully she guarded herself from it. The regional council nomination changed her schedule, her visibility, and the expectations placed on her. Meetings multiplied. Briefings grew denser. The language around her shifted subtly, less, what do you think, more, we need your sign-off. Each time it happened, she felt the old pull, the ease of command, the seduction of being decisive without being questioned. She built counterweights. She requested dissenting memos. She rotated who spoke first. She made a habit of asking the quietest person in the room what they saw that others missed. These practices slowed meetings. They irritated people used to speed, but they worked. One afternoon, after a long session reviewing compliance frameworks, a senior delegate sighed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Siphesihle met his gaze evenly. Only for those used to shortcuts. The delegate stared back, then looked away. Amadou Ba watched from a careful distance. He had learned long ago that proximity could distort progress. People changed fastest when they owned their direction. Still, he paid attention. Patterns mattered more than promises. He noticed how Siphesihle handled disagreement, how she absorbed criticism without stiffening, how she corrected misstatements publicly, including her own, without drama. One evening, after a particularly contentious meeting, he called her. You didn't push back when they questioned your authority, he said. I didn't need to, she replied. The work held. Amadou smiled faintly. That's the difference between power and position. The test that followed did not come from a boardroom. It came from the street. A video circulated late one night, not the slap, but something else. Footage of a young woman being publicly berated by a security officer outside a government building. The woman's crime was unclear. The officer's tone was not. The clip went viral within hours. Siphesihle watched it once, then again. The sound of the officer's voice, sharp, dismissive, triggered a visceral memory. She felt it in her chest before she could name it. The next morning, her phone rang constantly. Advisors urged caution. It's not your jurisdiction. Let the ministry handle it. Don't insert yourself. Siphesihle listened. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She went to the building, no cameras, no statement, just presence. She asked to speak with the officer's supervisor. She requested incident reports. She asked the woman privately if she wanted support or distance. She did not promise outcomes. She promised process. When reporters arrived later, she declined interviews. This isn't about me, she said simply. It's about stopping harm. By evening, the officer had been suspended pending investigation. The woman had access to legal aid and counseling. The ministry announced a review of security conduct protocols. The internet did what it always did, speculated, praised accused. Siphesihle turned her phone off. That night she walked alone. The city hummed around her, indifferent and alive. She passed vendors closing for the day, children playing near dim streetlights, men arguing softly over a game. Life went on as it always did, regardless of who learned a lesson. She stopped at the corner where it had happened. The spot was unremarkable now. No marker, no memory for anyone else. She stood there longer than she intended. Are you waiting for someone? She turned. Amadou stood a few steps away, hands in his pockets, expression calm. I didn't know you'd be here, she said. I didn't know I would either, he replied. They stood in silence for a moment. I saw what you did today, Amadou said. Siphesihle nodded. It felt necessary. It was, he agreed, and costly. She smiled faintly. Everything worth doing seems to be. Amadou studied the street. Do you know why I never responded publicly to the slap? She shook her head. You said revenge compromises power. That's part of it, he said. The other part is this public correction often teaches people how to perform remorse. Private consequence teaches them how to change. She absorbed that quietly. I didn't know who you were that day, she said at last. I know, Amadou replied. I knew who I was, she continued. That's the part that mattered. Amadou nodded. It still does. The following weeks brought a strange calm. Not peace calm. The kind that arrives when momentum steadies and attention drifts. Projects advanced. Reviews concluded. The council's work became less controversial, more procedural. Siphesihle missed the friction. She mentioned it once half-joking to Amadou. Calm is dangerous, she said. It makes people careless. It makes people reveal themselves. Amadou replied, Carelessness is information, she smiled. You always turn caution into strategy, and you turn regret into discipline, he said. We all work with what we have. The invitation arrived quietly. A community association requested that Siphesihle attend a reconciliation forum, not to speak, but to sit. The forum included people who had been directly affected by abuses of power, public and private. One name on the list made her pause. The fruit vendor. Siphesihle considered declining. Then she remembered what she had promised herself months ago. She attended. The room was small. The chairs were mismatched. The conversations were raw. When it was her turn to speak, she stood slowly. I'm not here to ask forgiveness, she said. I'm here to accept consequence. The vendor spoke next. You embarrassed that man, she said plainly, and you embarrassed yourself. Siphesihle nodded. Yes, you don't get to decide when people move on, the woman continued. We do. I know, Siphesihle replied. The woman studied her for a long moment. Then she sighed. You're still here. Yes, Siphesihle said. I am. That counts for something, the vendor said. Not everything, but something. Siphesihle sat down, breath trembling. It was enough. Later that evening, Amadou called. How did it go? He asked. Hard, Siphesihle said. Necessary. He was quiet for a moment. There's one more thing, he said. She waited. I'm stepping back from the council next year, Amadou continued. Not away, just back. Her chest tightened. Why? Because institutions should outlive individuals, he said, and because it's time for others to carry weight. She understood what he was not saying. You're not asking me to replace you, she said. No, Amadou replied. I'm asking you to help ensure no one needs to. She smiled, emotion rising unexpectedly. I can do that. I know, he said. On the anniversary of the deal, there were no celebrations. Siphesihle spent the day in meetings, then in transit, then walking home as dusk settled. She passed the street corner again and did not stop this time. At home, she opened a notebook she had kept since the beginning. On the first page, she had written one sentence, never confuse power with permission. She added another beneath it, and never confuse remorse with repair. She closed the notebook and set it aside. Outside, the city breathed. Inside, Siphesihle felt something like readiness, not for applause, not for absolution, but for the long, unglamorous work that followed change. She understood now that redemption wasn't a finish line. It was a direction, and she was finally facing it. The day the city truly let go of the slap, no one noticed. There was no headline announcing closure, no trending clip marking the end of outrage. The world simply shifted its attention elsewhere, as it always did. New scandals arrived, new villains were appointed. The past, relentless as it once felt, loosened its grip. But Siphesihle Zondi noticed. She noticed it in the way people spoke to her without hesitation, in the way disagreement no longer carried suspicion, in the way silence around her no longer felt loaded. She also noticed something else. She no longer needed the memory of the slap to guide her. It lived inside her now, not as shame but as orientation. The regional council entered a decisive phase that year. Budgets tightened. Political pressure increased. Several members began advocating for flexibility, a word Siphesihle had learned to treat with caution. Flexibility often meant compromise without accountability. During one final session before recess, a proposal surfaced that threatened to undo months of work. The language was careful, the intentions politely framed. But Siphesihle recognized the pattern immediately. This was harm wearing a reasonable face. The room debated for hours. Voices rose. Patience thinned. Finally, all eyes turned to Siphesihle. She felt the weight of the moment not as fear, but as clarity. I won't support this, she said calmly. A few heads shook. Someone sighed in frustration. You're blocking consensus, a delegate argued. Siphesihle nodded. Sometimes consensus is the problem. The room stilled. She continued, measured and steady. We've learned what happens when speed replaces care, when profit outruns protection. I won't be part of repeating that cycle." Silence followed. Then, one by one, others spoke cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Concerns were voiced that had been waiting for permission. The proposal was amended, safeguards reinstated, the decision passed. After the session, a junior delegate approached her. "How did you know when to stand firm?" he asked. Siphesihle considered the question. "Because I know what it feels like," she said, "to realize too late that you should have." That evening she met Amadou Ba one last time before his planned step back from public leadership. They chose the garden again, not out of symbolism but habit. "You've built something that will continue without you," Siphesihle said. "That was always the goal," Amadou replied. They walked slowly side by side. "I've been thinking about that day," Siphesihle said after a while. "Not the slap. What came after?" Amadou glanced at her. "And I used to think justice meant correcting others," she said. "Now I think it begins with correcting yourself publicly if necessary." Amadou nodded. "Public accountability is rare. Most people prefer private regret." "I did too," she admitted. "At first." They stopped near the edge of the path. "There's something I never said," Siphesihle added, "because I didn't feel entitled to." Amadou waited. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "not just for the slap, for the ease with which I believed I was allowed to do it." Amadou studied her for a long moment. "I accept that," he said. Her breath caught. Not as forgiveness, he continued, but as recognition. "You understand the harm." Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. "That's all I ever needed," Amadou added. "Understanding precedes change." They stood in silence, the city humming around them. "You'll do well," he said finally. "So will you," she replied. Amadou smiled. "I already have." He turned and walked away, leaving Siphesihle alone in the fading light. Years later, when people spoke of Siphesihle Zondi, they rarely mentioned the slap. They spoke instead of the policies she refused to rush, the oversight frameworks she protected when they became inconvenient, the habit she cultivated of listening before leading. Some still remembered the video. Siphesihle never asked them to forget it. At a small training session for young professionals, someone once asked her, "What was the most important moment of your career?" She didn't hesitate. "The moment I learned I was capable of harm," she said. "Because that's when I learned I was responsible for preventing it." The room fell quiet. She let it. Chairman Themba Zondi retired quietly. On his final day, he called his daughter into his office. "You taught me something," he said. Siphesihle raised an eyebrow. "That's new." He smiled sadly. "That power without accountability corrodes everything it touches, including love." She reached for his hand. "You taught me something too." "And what's that?" he asked. "That being corrected is not the same as being diminished." He nodded, eyes shining. "You're right." On a warm afternoon, long after the city had forgotten the details, Siphesihle walked past the street corner one final time. She stopped. Not out of pain, out of gratitude. She thought of the person she had been quick to anger, confident in permission she had never earned. She thought of the man who refused to destroy her when he could have. She thought of the work that followed, slow, uncelebrated, necessary. Her phone buzzed with a message from a junior colleague. "I'm unsure whether to speak up in tomorrow's meeting." Siphesihle typed back, "If your silence protects comfort, speak. If your voice protects people, don't hesitate." She put the phone away and continued walking. The city moved with her, not because she was powerful, but because she had learned when power must stop and when responsibility must begin. The story you've just heard is not really about a slap money or power. It is about the moment we discover who we are when no one is forcing us to look. Life does not always punish us immediately for our worst actions. Sometimes it gives us something far more difficult, a chance to face ourselves. Siphesihle's journey reminds us that true change is not loud, it is not dramatic, it does not happen in one apology or one good deed. Real transformation is quiet, repetitive, and often uncomfortable. It is choosing restraint when ego wants control. It is choosing accountability when excuses feel easier. It is staying present even when walking away would protect our pride. Amadou's restraint teaches another powerful truth. Not every wrong must be answered with revenge. Sometimes the greatest power is refusing to become smaller in response to someone else's failure. When we respond with integrity instead of anger, we interrupt cycles of harm and give others the chance to grow beyond their worst moment. This story asks all of us an honest question when we realize we are capable of causing harm. What do we do next? Do we defend ourselves, or do we change? Do we demand forgiveness, or do we earn trust through consistent action? If this story moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. What part of the journey stayed with you the most? Have you ever faced a moment that forced you to confront who you were becoming? And if you believe stories like this matter, stories about accountability, compassion, and real human growth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More powerful stories are coming, and your presence here truly matters.